Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I want to talk about what's happening in terms of the U.S. election. I also want to talk about the United States of America versus communist China in the creation of a global dictatorship or a global totalitarian system, or what the Bible refers to as a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world economic system that the Bible predicts will rise in the last days. And indeed, it is rising. This global government is rising in the last days. Now, let's start off first with just imagery that has appeared on the media, video, television, pictures, internet, etc. Pictures, symbols. I remember writing one of my earlier books, A Prophecy of the Future of America, volumes 1 and 2, and Conquering the Matrix. And I remember answering a question from somebody who was a Christian, and they said, well, what's the big deal about symbols? Why should we be concerned about symbols? Well, I can't imagine being more ignorant than that, because people who are high-level people in the globalist elite, people who are high-level members of like the Illuminati and the globalist elite and the occult elite, or what I sometimes refer to as the Luciferian elite, they totally understand, they've understood this for thousands of years, that symbols, occultic symbols, have power in the physical world and in the psychological realm of men and women. And only an idiot would say symbols are not important. Look at any government in the history of mankind, and you will see that that government holds on to its power, holds on to its domination of the people through a variety of means. Military force, police force, but also the use of propaganda and specifically symbols, for good or bad. So for example, in the United States of America, the American flag is a symbol of America. You have statues are very, very important. You know, I remember when I was doing the Paul McGuire show, which came before the Paul McGuire Report. And this was a number of years ago. And this topic of our symbols important came up. Again, from a caller who I imagine was a Christian. And this person was, because I was talking about how dangerous it was when symbols are destroyed. And I gave the example that in Iraq, and while the Iraq invasion was going on, the people of Iraq, etc., were rising up, and you remember the footage too. There was all this news footage of the people of Iraq tying ropes around giant statues of Saddam Hussein, the former dictator of Iraq, and any symbol of Saddam Hussein's. And the masses of people in their revolt, one of the first things they did was they tore down the statues of Saddam Hussein and broke them into pieces. Why did they do this? Because for the people that were being oppressed in Iraq, those symbols of Saddam Hussein and statues of him, etc., those were symbols of his power and of his oppression. And so what they were attempting to do is by smashing those symbols to pieces, by tearing down those statues of Saddam Hussein, they were on a symbolic level first smashing the power of Saddam Hussein. Because you see, the first goal is to destroy the symbol and what the symbol represents. So when a mob or when a group of people for good or for evil, when they tear down a symbol, when they destroy a symbol, what they're doing is they're waging war against the power behind the symbol. And when they can break a symbol into pieces, they are communicating that now there's been a transference of power, that power, like the power of Saddam Hussein, is no longer legitimate. And this has occurred in every conflict, military, social uprising, revolution. This is nothing new. Anybody who has more than a shot glass of historical knowledge in them knows that in every revolution, every communist revolution, every uprising in the history of mankind always goes hand in hand with the destruction of symbols. Now, that should be like a no-brainer. But because we have entire generations that have been dumbed down by the educational system, they can't even process that thinking. So this Christian on this previous program, years ago, because I was talking about why it was important to tear down the symbols of Saddam Hussein, they too didn't get it. They said, well, symbols aren't important. How deadly wrong can you be? Every expert in psychological warfare, every expert in military history will tell you the importance of symbols. And in addition to that, while Christians, kind of are out to lunch on this, the people who are high up in the occult, they fully understand the powers of symbols. A symbol in the physical world is an anchor point for spiritual, perhaps demonic energy, or if it's a good symbol, it's a symbol of God's energy. It's not that we worship the symbol like an idol. It's not that we idolize the symbol. But the symbol represents, it's a physical representation of power, of a power transference from the invisible realm or the spiritual world. So all these statues in America that have been torn down and smashed to bits, that's exactly what happens every time there's an uprising, a revolution, a communist revolution, a Nazi takeover, or whatever. They always begin by tearing down, dismantling the symbols of the former power that was in control. So that means destroy the flags, destroy the monuments, destroy the textbooks, destroy the names of streets and the names of buildings. What their goal is to totally revise history. They want to erase from the minds of the programmed masses in America. They want to mentally erase from their brains any memory of a free constitutional America. So they've got to tear down all the symbols. What does that mean? It means, for that reason and many, many others, such as the riots in the streets, such as the fact that the legitimate protesters, or some of the people who were the legitimate protesters, who naively thought they were protesting against, the horrible killing of an African American man. They thought they were protesting legitimately racism, and they didn't understand that they were, in the words of the famous communist revolutionary, both Lenin and Stalin, that they were functioning as what the communist leaders called useful idiots. And communist strategy is all about exploiting the masses. Go to the place where the masses feel betrayed, where they feel wounded, where they feel ripped off, and exploit that. That's what the term "never let a good crisis go to waste" means. It means never let a manufactured crisis, never let a crisis go to waste. And what communist Marxist agents seek to do is they look for the people in any society who are disenfranchised, who are isolated, alienated, who feel, perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly, but they feel that they've been cheated by the system, that they've been ripped off. The communist strategy is to use communist and Marxist agents to do what Abbie Hoffman did. Now, remember, I was raised in an atheist household. I was deeply involved in the New Age movement for the earlier part of my life. And I was demonstrating and trained by the radical activists of my time, which was like the 70s. And actually earlier, I was demonstrating with the radical activists when I was 15 years old, so it would have been the 60s. And Abbie Hoffman, the radical activist, who later admitted he was a full-blown communist, would teach younger radicals, such as myself, and he would say things like, organize the discontent. Now, back then, I didn't know that there was a communist operating principle. The idea is find out where the discontent, the rage, and the anger is in society and exploit it. And when you properly exploit the discontent, you then can have a full-blown Marxist revolution, a full-blown communist revolution. You can topple the existing government. You can overthrow the existing government. But you've got to organize the discontent, and you've got to manipulate the psychological forces, the economic forces, the social forces, the governmental forces that exist in a society. So what we're watching now is nothing mysterious. It shouldn't require anybody to have to spend a whole lot of time figuring out, why is this happening? You have to be a bloody idiot to ask the question, why is it happening? You are looking at a Marxist revolution, a communist revolution happening right in front of us. I mean, what more do you need? The angry demonstrators who are wearing, their faces are concealed with masks. The majority of those members of Antifa were white guys, young white guys. They weren't black, they weren't African American. So the people doing the violence, the majority of them, the people who are heavily organized doing the violence, are white. They're just using the racial discontent, the perception of a lack of social justice. The communist white guys, young white guys, are just organizing the discontent that exists in the African American communities. And that's the standard operating procedure of every communist and Marxist revolution. That, and also propaganda, brainwashing the people, and then lying to the people. Deception, as we said the other day on the Paul McGuire Report. Communism, Marxism, revolution, even Satanism or whatever. Those movements do not move forward. They do not take territory unless they operate on one of their other primary operating principles, which is deception. Psychological deception, political deception, economic deception, and spiritual deception. Communism and Marxism move step by step in their revolution, but what is essential is that they lie to the people. And what naive, overly soft evangelical men, evangelical leaders, now I'm specifically saying evangelical men and evangelical leaders because to date the majority of them are men. And I'm not trying to disparage them. I'm not trying to just be smart and sarcastic. I'm giving you an accurate appraisal of the psychological condition of the average evangelical male. And this is what it is. They have been feminized along with the rest of the males in U.S. society through social engineering in the school systems and the media. They've been feminized. Now, you can get upset about that, but when men cease to function as men, then females and society no longer have the built-in protections, the built-in security, the built-in safety net, the built-in covering that God designed them to have, that would be expressed through the male. Not because the male is superior to the female. The Bible doesn't say that. The male and the female are equal, but they have different giftings, different talents, and different responsibilities. Males are designed by God to be like the provider, protector. But you see, when you have a full-blown Marxist uprising, communist uprising, revolution going on in America right now, and their goal is to have a coup, their goal is to get rid of this president, because across the world, the globalist elite that are financing these revolutions and demonstrations, who are super capitalists, they perceive President Donald Trump as their greatest threat because Trump has the power, the money, the political power, the intelligence, the historical understanding. He embodies the greatest threat to this communist Marxist uprising. And that's why they hate the white male with such a passion. They hate the white male because what they're really after, they're using racism and social injustice. Again, going back to the primary operating principles of communism and Marxism, which you need to know, for crying out loud. I get tired of talking to Christians who don't know diddly squat. I'm not talking about you, the listener of the Paul McGuire Report. I'm talking about the people that you and I meet on an everyday basis who call themselves Christians and who are completely clueless, and shame on them, and shame on their churches, and shame on those, not all pastors, but shame on those pastors who have deliberately raised up because they have been unfaithful to teaching the Word of God and rightly dividing the Word of God. These Christian leaders, these seminaries, these pastors, not all, some, have raised up numerous generations of feminized males who don't know how to be leaders, who don't know what it means to be a man, and who can't function in their God-given role as the protector, provider for their wives, children, family, and society. This was not the case going back to during the Vietnam War. The guys that went over there were not feminized males. This feminized male thing, I think, has probably taken place, in the last 20, 30 years. And it was done through psychological programming, social engineering in the school systems and the media, scientific mind control, hypnotic programming. The male and the God-given attributes of the male were under all-out attack. Now, why would that be? It would be for the exact same reason that the globalist elite, the Marxist, communist, revolutionaries, etc., they hate Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump has the financial power, political power, psychological power, etc., to be a force to expose them, defeat them, and resist them. Now, our society is under all-out attack right now, and has been for quite some time. And there has been, until recently, until the right for churches to stay open and the right of churches to hold worship services in their churches, it was only until that right was threatened that the chickens came home to roost. Now, better late than never, but the reason there has been such a response by pastors who are standing up, and I congratulate them for that, standing up and fighting for their religious freedoms, fighting for their right, their constitutional right to hold church services without governmental interference. I thank God for all the pastors who have risen up on this issue. But look, let's not be remiss in in the totality of our understanding of what happened. America didn't wake up. This is important for you to understand. And for crying out loud, if you and I do not repent of our apathy and get engaged and do what God called us to do, even if it means starting at this late moment, we're going to lose this nation so fast your head's going to spin. And all of you who have no knowledge of history and you live in a delusion and you think, oh, it can't happen here. For crying out loud, don't tell me that garbage. When you say it can't happen here, you're quoting the exact words, and this is not meant as an anti-Semitic remark, so don't twist my words. You're quoting the exact words, it can't happen here, that the Jews were saying in Nazi Germany. As the Jews began to hear these reports and these rumors, and as the Jews began to find out about the fact that Hitler and the Nazis had built concentration camps, and that the Nazis were killing millions of Jews and others by burning their bodies to death in the gas ovens of the concentration camps, and killing them by putting them in the gas chambers of the concentration camps. The Jews all over Europe and Germany were hearing rumors about this, but they chose to say, oh, those rumors are conspiracy theories. They're not true. And the exact words they used when people would try to warn them about what was happening and the threat that was standing right in front of them, the Jews kept saying, it can't happen here. It can't happen here. You see, when the Jews were confronted with the truth of the Holocaust, they went into psychological denial and they said, it can't happen here. It can't happen here in Germany. The people are too good. There's too many Christian values, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact of the matter was that it was happening there in Germany. Millions and millions and millions of Jews and other people were being gassed to death and killed in concentration camps. And it could have been stopped by both the Christians and the Jews. In other words, the dictator, Adolf Hitler, the totalitarian regime of Nazi Germany, the Holocaust and the murder of millions and millions of Jews and others, the sadistic and torturous experiments performed by Nazi doctors on little girls, boys, women, and children, where they basically tortured them to death under the guise of scientific experimentation during MK Ultra. All of those horrors, the invasion into other nations, the millions of people that died during World War II, the threat that the Nazis became, all of this, the whole rise of Adolf Hitler, the whole rise and takeover of Germany by the Nazis, it all could have been stopped at the very beginning if when the Jews and, yes, the Protestants and others, when they began to hear the reports, the so-called conspiracy theories, and they began to hear the reports and rumors that Jews were being arrested and death camps were being built and concentration camps were killing off millions of Jews, they chose to deny it. They chose to say it wasn't happening. They chose to willfully enter a psychological state of unbelief regarding the truth of what was happening. They went into total psychological denial, and that was reinforced by their words, where every time they heard accurate reports of the Holocaust, they would, like parrots, say over and over again, "It can't happen here." Well, it did. It did. But it could have been stopped. But it could have been stopped. The opportunity to stop Hitler and the Nazis was at the very beginning. And then when they first heard the words, "It can't happen here," that was their words. If they had accepted responsibility for the fact that the reality was it was happening there, it was growing, they could have, the Jews and others could have stopped it. The Holocaust, Hitler and the Nazis, did not have to happen. And people always ask this question: how could a loving God allow such horrible things? How could a loving God have allowed Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, to do the horrors they did? And people always blame God. How could a loving God allow that? How could a loving God allow that? And then they try to use that as a proof that God doesn't exist. Because after all, they say, if God is love and he exists, how could he have allowed that? That's the wrong question to ask. You're thinking upside down. You're thinking while you're standing on your dumb head. How could it happen? How could it happen? How could a loving God have allowed such horrors to happen? You can't blame it on God. That's the whole point. You're blaming it on God. You have to blame it on yourself. The responsibility for the rise of the Nazis, Adolf Hitler, and the Holocaust, that responsibility, you can't blame that on God. That was allowed to happen and empowered to happen by all the evangelical Christians and Christians in Germany, all the Catholics in Germany, and a huge percentage of the Jews allowed it to happen. Because all of those groups denied that it was happening and pretended that it wasn't happening when they could see it happening right in front of their faces. They went into denial, and the Jews hid in their ghettos. Now ghettos is not exactly the same term, like today. We talk about ghettos. The ghettos in Europe were slightly different. They were lousy neighborhoods, but they were deliberately built to confine the Jews and to keep the Jews away from the rest of the German population. And so all hell broke loose. And you can't blame it on God. It was the responsibility of the people who empowered it. It was the responsibility of the people who allowed it. It was the responsibility of the people who denied it was even happening. And when they heard it was happening, they still denied it by saying it can't happen here. And all of those things were opportunities where if they had acted decisively and morally and courageously at the very beginning, they could have stopped Hitler before he became a monster. They could have prevented the Holocaust. You understand what I'm saying? You understand how important it is to know history and to have knowledge, which is power? Now, in a moment, I'm going to expose the secret reason for why the Holocaust happened, why millions of Jews and others were slaughtered, and why Hitler who was demon-possessed. His own generals believed he was demon-possessed. Hitler was also put into power by known occult secret societies composed of very wealthy men who were in the occult and also supported Hitler. So, the wealthy secret societies like Skull and Bones, Skull and Bones, the same secret society that the Bushes belong to, that John Kerry belongs to, that many other American politicians and financial people belong to. They put Hitler in power. I'm not making it up. It's a historical fact. And other secret societies in Germany, like the Vril Society, the Thule Society. So the very symbols, going back to symbols having importance, Hitler knew the importance of symbols. Hitler was a Satanist, an occultist. He knew the importance of symbols in taking over a nation. That's why he had those gigantic flags, the red flags, those massive red flags with the swastikas. That's why his elite soldiers had skull and bones, belt buckles, and skull and bones symbols on their military caps and belt buckles, and etc. An occultic symbol. That's why the swastika, which was an ancient occult symbol from Tibet, was placed everywhere. Hitler used all kinds. And the lightning bolts that were placed on the SS, on flags, on military vehicles. You would see these two lightning bolts, the same two occultic, satanic lightning bolts that lots of rock and roll groups use. You'll see those two lightning bolts. Well, in Nazi Germany, the SS troops, which were the most evil of Hitler's troops and the most elite, the SS officers, etc., they all had uniforms with the lightning bolts on them, a satanic symbol, a symbol of Lucifer. So you see, just like in when Saddam Hussein was taken down, they pulled down the symbols first and they took him down. This is a historical pattern. So what Hitler was doing is he was tearing down all the previous symbols. He blew up the nation's capital, the Reichstag. He had these occultic symbols everywhere. And he used that to brainwash the people psychologically and demonically so he could remold them into being Nazis who would die for Hitler and give up their lives in Hitler's Fourth Reich, which was his plan to take over the world. So I want to expose the real secret behind that. Because unless good people in America today wake up and learn how to recognize what symbols are saying to them, and Christians especially, oh God help the Christians in America, the feminization of the Christian male. All this nonsense about pointing the fingers about everybody else regarding sexuality. You have a right to express your opinion, but criticizing everybody else becomes a meaningless, pathetic, impotent exercise in light of the fact that perhaps one of the greatest aberrations of human nature is the feminization of males through social engineering and indoctrination. And Christian evangelical churches are packed with feminized males. You don't like that. I know you don't like that. You know why you don't like it? Because I'm speaking the truth to you, and you've had so much soft gospel, so much watered down gospel that when you get the real stuff, you can't handle it. You can't handle the truth. And how it usually exemplifies itself is you get angry at the messenger, me. Well, I'm going to tell you the truth whether you like it or not, because God called me to be a faithful, not unfaithful watchmen on the wall. And when the symbols start to rise, the faithful watchman, who's supposed to be in the watchtower, can see the enemy coming from a distance. And it's his job to blow the trumpet, to rouse the people of God to defend themselves so they don't get slaughtered. But in modern society, one of the ways that the watchman can discern and perceive that the enemy is coming to destroy God's people is that that watchman must study and know the meaning of the symbols that the enemies of God and the carriers of the spirit of Antichrist, the watchman on the wall, needs to know what the symbols mean. Because when you understand what the symbols mean, you understand that the enemy's attacking you. Wake up. So once again, symbols are first and foremost of what happens when a people are about to be invaded, conquered, destroyed, massacred, taken into captivity or slavery. The first thing the people that are being invaded will begin to see, if they have their eyes open, is the fact that these symbols begin to appear. The symbols in every military battle, if you go back to the Roman army, which was one of the best military forces in the world, when the Romans would march into battle, they would have their soldiers, but they would have, at the very beginning of the invasion, at the front of the line of the soldiers by invasion, the Roman soldiers would have all these like flags and these poles and banners and symbols of Rome and symbols of Rome's power that their military would hold up. It was a psychological means of reminding their enemies that they were facing the Roman army, the most powerful army on planet Earth. And it was used to break the spirit of their enemies and terrify them so that they would be victorious even quicker. Now, when Hitler began to take over Germany, he used propaganda, hypnosis, mind control. You don't believe that? Look at the black and white videos of Adolf Hitler's speeches to the masses in Germany. They're hypnotic. And then he began to introduce all these occultic symbols. I mean, these were hardcore occult symbols that represented Satan, demons, fallen angels. I mean, do you need a clock dropped on your head? The skull and bones is a symbol of death. You know, it's the same symbol as the pirate symbol. Skull and bones is a symbol of death. So, yeah, the SS troops brought death wherever they came. They were horrific. And they wore skull and bones symbols. And they wore the dual lightning bolts of Satanism that represents Satan. And they belonged to occult secret societies. And they used the swastika, which was an ancient that came from ancient Tibet. Now, the word swastika comes from Sanskrit. And the swastika goes all the way back to ancient Hinduism, Buddhism, and the heavy occult religions of ancient Tibet. So the swastika is even today an icon or a symbol that is found all over human history and all over the contemporary or modern world. And it represents occultic power. But as I write about in many pages and devote chapters to it in my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, and in A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volumes 1 and 2, and in my book, Mass Awakening, and the book on breaking mind control and occult mind control, which is called Conquering the Matrix. In many of my books, I deal with this occult symbolism. So let's get back to it, because you can't just glide over this. This is like a label defining what something is. So the swastika goes back thousands of years. You can see it in ancient Hindu temples, ancient Buddhist temples. You can see the swastika embedded in rock in a giant statue of the Buddha with the swastika. And you see that, again, the origin of the word swastika comes from Sanskrit, which is essentially an ancient Hindu-based language. And the swastika, among other things, symbolizes what's called Surya, the sun. The swastika, according to occult teachings, represents prosperity and good luck. And then you see in a number of major Indo-European religions, the swastika symbolizes lightning bolts, representing the thunder god and the king of gods, such as Indra in Vedic Hinduism, such as Zeus from the Greek religion, such as Jupiter from the Roman occult religion, and Thor from the ancient Germanic religion. Now, the thing about this is that the swastika is used in occult religions in ancient China, Samaria, in the Byzantine culture. Now, let's zero in on exposing the occult secret of the swastika. Okay, because this is important. The occult purpose of the swastika, what the symbol was supposed to do in terms of generating occult power. Now, another thing that we need to know about the swastika is that the swastika, according to some experts, actually represents the North Pole. Why is that important? Why is that important that the swastika represents the North Pole? Well, for numerous reasons. The swastika also represents the sun. The swastika represents an occult divine order. It serves a purpose like the Hindu mantra Om, O-M, or the Chinese occultic god called the Great One. And again, according to numerous experts, the swastika represents the North Pole, and it, according to ancient legend, beings from another planet or another dimension were connected symbolically to the swastika. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis also believed that at one time in ancient history or prehistory, there was a super civilization, an occult religion, if you will, that was centered high up in the mountains of ancient Tibet. That's why before World War II broke out, Hitler sent both military and research teams to the farthest reaches of the earth, searching for occultic symbols, manuscripts, statues, etc., etc. And Hitler sent advanced scientific teams and his military into the mountains of Tibet to not only get swastikas, but other occult symbols and knowledge. Many of you have seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, directed by Steven Spielberg. That whole depiction of the Nazis going into the Middle East, other blatantly open symbols that were occultic, satanic, Luciferian, used by the Nazis, was the symbol of the black sun, which I go into great detail about in my book, Volume 1, A Prophecy of the Future of America. The black sun is very important to the Nazis as a symbol. It was a symbol of the Vril occult secret society. And the Nazis believed that deep under the ice, there was an ancient super civilization in Antarctica, the poles, the North Pole, that deep under the earth, there was and especially also in Antarctica, Hitler sent his submarines, U-boats, and to explore scientifically and from an occult perspective, Antarctica, where, according to Nazi theology, an ancient blonde-haired, blue-eyed race from another planet, a super civilization, there was a great flood that came upon mankind, and to escape this flood, this blonde-haired, blue-eyed race of a super civilization that supposedly came from the stars, they retreated to secret underground bases deep under Antarctica. And deep under Antarctica and the poles, there was a deep underground sun. So there's the sun in outer space that we can all see. But according to Nazi legends and other legends, under the ice of Antarctica, there's a deep, deep underground sun. Could have something to do with the molten core of the earth. And this underground sun was the source of the supernatural power and energy that the Nazis believed they tapped into, called the Vril force. And the symbol of the Vril force was, again, this black sun, another occultic symbol. And these are obviously not Christian symbols. Then you have many, many other symbols, the symbols of the Thule Society, Anerby, and these all have occult. They began and were birthed in secret occult societies. Now, the critical thing is that when Hitler took over, this is how it happened. I'm going to give you like a mini historical lesson. Many, many, many of you know this, but the average person doesn't know this. This is why, in a very, very quick, fast download, this is why Adolf Hitler was able to conquer Germany and almost conquer the world with the Nazis. Number one, at the same time that the German occult secret societies were growing in power, were growing in the knowledge of how to use their supernatural power, the Nazis were also growing in their knowledge of scientific power that they gained through occult means and occult technology. The Vril Ya maidens, and Vril coming from the Vril force, And I talk all about this whole story in A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and Volume 2. The Vril maidens met with key Nazi leaders in a cafe in Vienna in 1936. And the Vril maidens were these beautiful female clairvoyant mediums who believed that they were tapping into beings from another dimension. And the Vril maidens, literally channeled from another dimension. They channeled from demonic entities detailed technological blueprints on how to build things like anti-gravity machines, rockets, Tesla-type technology, and many other technologies that it wasn't just a bunch of hot air, and UFO technology. But this gave the Nazis a military superiority, especially in rocketry. Now, the source of this power came from the Vril maidens. They were occult disciples. And so this is all real stuff. I mean, this happened. So at around the same time that the Vril Society and the other secret, powerful occult societies, Thule, Vril, and others, beginning in the 1920s, actually beginning in the 1800s, but accelerating in the 1920s, etc., what they did is they worked secretly hand in hand with groups like the Frankfurt School. Even though the Frankfurt School professors were outwardly, they pretended to be atheists, secretly many of them were occultists. So what happened was the Frankfurt School, let's put it out this way. So at the same time, the occult secret societies are evangelizing and winning converts into Satanism and the secret occult societies of Germany, while Hitler is being demon-possessed and participating in all kinds of secret occult rituals, taking psychedelic drugs and leaving his body, opening himself up to demon possession, etc. While the occult secret societies of Germany flourished, and the knowledge and expertise and interest and study of occult power and satanic power was both studied and practiced. So while the occult and Satanism was growing in power in Germany, at the exact same time, evangelical or biblical Christianity was shrinking, was being destroyed. How was it being destroyed? Huge numbers of would-be Christian pastors, Bible study people, denominational heads, ordinary Christians who wanted to know more about the Bible and stuff. All of these people were being recruited to attend what were called the German schools of theological higher criticism. That these schools were created by communist agents who were Marxist professors of the Frankfurt School that began in the 1920s in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, all the Christians and the Christian leaders who went through the German School of Theological Higher Criticism, which in actuality was the Frankfurt German School of Theological Higher Criticism, all that was an educational process designed to deprogram Christians and Christian pastors and Christian leaders. The German schools of theological higher criticism was nothing more than a brainwashing, social engineering, indoctrination, propaganda mechanism designed to strip all the German Christians from having a real viable biblical faith. Because day after day in the classrooms of the German schools of theological higher criticism, they were literally criticizing away any belief in the truthfulness of the Bible. So by the time all these Christian pastors and seminary leaders and Bible teachers and Christians graduated from the German schools of theological higher criticism, by the time they graduated, they no longer believed in Christianity as being true. They no longer believed in the supernatural power of the supernatural God of the Bible. They no longer believed in creationism. They no longer believed in a literal resurrection of Jesus Christ. They no longer believed in miraculous healing, the virgin birth. They no longer believed in any aspect of the Bible, like this miraculous splitting of the Red Sea and the deliverance of the Jews through Moses in the Old Testament. They no longer believed in the second coming of Jesus Christ. In other words, the purpose of the German theological schools of higher criticism was nothing more than a communist engineered educational system that had one purpose. And according to the professors, the intellectual professors, who were also hardcore Marxists of the Frankfurt School of German theological higher criticism, they said openly that their number one goal was first to destroy the religion of Christianity. Number two goal was to destroy Christian marriage, the institution of marriage. Number three goal was to destroy all moral absolutes, like anything to do with right or wrong, to totally destroy it. Then to destroy any nationalism, and finally to destroy patriotism. So what happened was, while the occult was growing, while Satanism was growing, while the occult was taking over the government, while the occult secret societies were placing Adolf Hitler in political power as head of Germany, and they were all the Nazis, the high-level Nazis and many others, they were all believing and practicing hardcore occult principles. Simultaneously, the Christian pastors and other Christians were brainwashed into not believing in a supernatural God, in God's supernatural power, God's miracles, or the supernatural reality of the Bible. So, on one hand, the occult is flourishing and growing, and on the other hand, true biblical Christianity is being ripped to shreds by the German schools of theological higher criticism, which destroyed true biblical Christianity in Germany at the time it was most needed, which was when Hitler was rising due to the occult power of the secret German occult secret societies. You get it? How on one hand, it appeared like, well, the Germans were too intelligent and sophisticated to believe in the supernatural. No, that was not the case. The Germans were gung-ho. They mixed the supernatural and the scientific. The Germans were going 100 miles an hour studying the occult and occult power. They just didn't want the supernatural power of God, and so they destroyed it. And so this left a huge number of evangelical Christians, and Catholics without any real biblical faith. These Christians no longer believe in the Bible. They no longer believe in the Holy Spirit. They no longer believed in what the Bible taught. Therefore, they were totally open, totally vulnerable to be spiritually deceived, and totally vulnerable to be conquered by Adolf Hitler. And what was the result of this? The reason Hitler rose to power was because he was elected legally in a popular election, and the people who elected Adolf Hitler into office as the Prime Minister of Germany were evangelical Christians and Catholics and other Christians. They were the ones who voted Hitler into power. How is that possible? Were they blind to the reports of the danger of the occult? Were they blind to the giant occult symbols? Where were the pastors? Why were the pastors in Germany silent? One could understand their silence once Hitler took over. But in the very beginning, Hitler was speaking to tiny little crowds, tiny little groups of people on the street. He was like a little street corner preacher. But the Nazi movement grew. And it grew because there was no opposition from the church. It grew because there was no light from the church. There was no Bible from the church. There was no spiritual warfare from the church. The church did not rise in the power of the Holy Spirit. It had no ability to spiritually discern that Hitler and the Nazis were demon-possessed. And as such, millions and millions of Jews and Christians died, and a nation was literally taken over by satanic power. That, my friend, is the true story of Nazi Germany. Why don't you hear this being taught in the churches? You don't think it's applicable today? What are you, crazy? This truth of the Bible, of God's power versus Satan's power, needs to be taught in churches today, because we are doing right now a déjà vu. Most of you know what déjà vu means. But in case there's anybody out there listening who doesn't, déjà vu, we've all had these experiences when we're walking somewhere, we're going somewhere, and all of a sudden, like, we feel like we've seen this person before, or we've been here before, or like whatever situation just happened, it was like we had a dream, like that it happened before. It seems like we were repeating it. That kind of mystical. And what it really is it's a psychological, neurological. The reason for déjà vu is based on neurological science, which I don't have time to get into now. But déjà vu is when you repeat something and you have this eerie sense that you've been there before or whatever. So historians and others, when they talk about history repeating itself, and you've heard the old expression, those that do not learn history are doomed, or those that are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. Those that do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So by the churches, the seminaries, the Christian teaching, because they have failed to teach God's people history, and because God's people are not getting any true historical teaching from the educational system, they have, in a sense, placed a curse on many generations of Americans who are going to be doomed to repeat the satanic cycle of what happened in Nazi Germany. The flag will be different. It'll be a different symbol, most likely. It won't be the swastika. It'll be a picture of planet Earth or something. But this whole Nazi occult scientific mindset which merged, it only happened because God's people, Christians, were apathetic, unfaithful to God, were backslidden, and attended schools that theoretically were designed to teach them the Bible, that were designed to teach them about biblical Christianity. But in fact, these schools were created by communist agents trained in Moscow who set up what was called the Frankfurt School in Germany in the 1920s. And the purpose of the Frankfurt School was to indoctrinate all the Western nations so they could destroy them. Now, just one example, a quick example of there is so much of the satanic teaching of the Frankfurt School, so much of those satanic teachings of the Frankfurt School have been force-fed into the minds and hearts of millions of Christians, young people and adults all over America and the world. Because millions of young people and adults who are Christians have been indoctrinated, brainwashed, and programmed in Frankfurt School beliefs. And remember, the Frankfurt School goal is, number one, destroy and eradicate Christianity. Number two, destroy Christian marriage. Number three, destroy any sense or belief of a moral absolute right or absolute wrong. Destroy nationalism, destroy patriotism. So when I do programs on the Paul McGuire Report, where I expose the truth, the dark truth behind what's called critical race theory, which is being accepted by major denominations like the Southern Baptist Convention and other major there are other major evangelical so-called Bible-believing denominations that have also embraced critical race theory. And the reason all these supposedly evangelical Christian denominations like the Southern Baptists are not only affirming critical race theory, but teaching it to their congregations, to the youth that go to their colleges and seminaries, is because they've been hoodwinked and brainwashed into believing. And the reason that they're vulnerable, the reason that they're soft targets, is because they have rejected intellectualism, which means you've rejected thinking, you've rejected history, you've rejected the teaching of theology, and you have rejected the totality of the truth of the Bible, and you no longer teach it. Therefore, you're a vulnerable, you're a soft target. And so the Marxist revolutionaries who have taken over our college campuses through the Frankfurt School, we have all these highly trained Marxist professors. What are they trained in? Implementing a Marxist revolution in America. So these Frankfurt School Marxists are now using the same system they used to destroy the church that allowed Hitler to take over and the Nazis to take over in Germany, which was called the German Schools of Theological Higher Criticism. That same battle plan is being used right now against the evangelical church in America. It's just that these trained Marxist professor revolutionaries are using new words to seduce the church into deception. And one of these new words is critical race theory. All critical race theory is, it's Marxism, okay? And it's the same teaching that destroyed biblical Christianity in Germany, but it's being sold as the solution to racism. So the Marxist professors are not calling themselves Marxists, and they're wooing and dialoguing with the heads of all these major Christian denominations, all these big pastors and megachurches and seminary professors of evangelical churches are being conned by the professors pushing critical race theory. And all critical race theory is a mechanism for destroying biblical Christianity. Critical race theory is nothing more than a mechanism for igniting a Marxist revolution, a communist revolution in America, under the guise of solving or healing the problem of racism. You understand? So these Christian pastors, unfaithful shepherds, hear it, simmer in the truth that the Christian pastors and seminaries and the evangelical denominations that are affirming critical race theory and teaching critical race theory to young people in their denominations, they are allowing the Marxists and the communists to take over the minds of Christians by opening the door wide opening. By being stupid and foolish, that's not an insult, that's a fair assessment. And because they don't know history, because knowledge is power, they ignorantly believe that critical race theory is going to effectively heal racism, when in fact it's nothing more than a Trojan horse to destroy the Christian church using the ploy or the bait of, we're going to heal racism. It has nothing to do with healing racism. The Bible is completely against racism. Every true Christian knows that racism is a sin. The purpose of critical race theory is to separate Christians from the Bible and replace the Bible and biblical Christianity with Marxist thought so that they can overthrow America as we know it and ignite a communist Marxist revolution in America. And we know that in every successful communist and Marxist revolution, the Church of Jesus Christ is attacked, destroyed, murdered, and persecuted. Free speech is taken away. Freedom of religion is destroyed. The right to bear arms is destroyed. Freedom of the press is destroyed. And every nation that embraces the Marxism behind critical race theory either succumbs to Nazi totalitarianism, which is National Socialism, or it falls to Marxism and communism. And that's where we are. That's exactly where we are. So when you see this literally staged virtual reality, global matrix theatrical production consisting of props like riots, protests, economic crisis, shootings, demonstrations, burning up, revolution. And when you see, what do you got to be? Blind, deaf, and dumb not to understand that the white guys that are Marxist revolutionaries and calling themselves anarchists or whatever they're going to call themselves, or Antifa or something, or whatever, those are communist organizations. They're telling you they're communist organizations. Right on the helmets that they wear is the communist, the Russian communist symbol of the hammer and sickle. So the hammer and sickle, which is a blatant communist revolutionary symbol, is right on the plexiglass or whatever it's made out of face masks that they're wearing. So you're seeing thousands of these so-called Antifa revolutionaries, but they have hammer and sickle insignias, which is a communist revolutionary symbol, on their helmets. They're telling you what they're doing before they're going to do it. And as history indicates, in both the case of communist revolutions, Marxist revolutions, and the National Socialist Revolution, which was the Nazi revolution, the way our politicians are falling for this deception, the way our political leaders are giving into this deception, the way our government is responding to this deception, the way the mainstream media is functioning as a propaganda machine for these radical organizations. None of this is new. This is exactly what happened, step by step, inch by inch, what we're witnessing on our TVs, what we're seeing in our streets with the riots and the shootings and the killings, etc. What we are, and defunding the police, get rid of the police, and tearing down all monuments, including tearing down with ropes the statues of good men like President Abraham Lincoln, who helped free the slaves and fought against racism, and tearing down the statues of many other good men. All of these things, the destruction of symbols, the co-opting of our political leaders, the media empowering them, everything that you're seeing on your television, etc., step by step, everything. It all comes out of a playbook. It all comes out of a manual, a battle plan, a procedure. They're using this exact same procedure that I just described to you, was used in Germany before the Nazis took over through Adolf Hitler. It was used by Chairman Mao in China when he led the Communist Revolution. It was used by Lenin and Stalin with the Russian Communist Revolution. It was written about by Karl Marx, the author of the Communist Manifesto. This is their basic standard operating procedure. And if nothing is done immediately to block it, to stop it, to interrupt it, to unplug its power source, to turn the off switch, if nothing is done, listen to me, please. Your life, your children's life, I don't care how old you are, you're going to feel this. Your children, your grandchildren, your friends, the people you know, everything that's happening is part of a scientifically generated series of principles and methodologies that were developed in the last 100 years. And in every one of these communist, Marxist, National Socialist, Nazi revolutions that occurred all over the world, especially the communist revolutions, they hide it, but the communists in the last 125 years have killed, murdered, starved to death, sent to concentration camps, sent to re-education camps, forced, even though they were sane, they were locked up by force in mental hospitals, chained to the beds, drugged out of their minds, or sent to freezing Siberia concentration camps with sub-zero temperatures and deliberate food shortages to starve their own people. A total of 240 million people died or went to those concentration camps and never came out. The true number that's always hidden is 240 million people died. Ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences. This is how, wake up. Wake up, my friend. Wake up, my brother and sister in Jesus Christ. This is not a joke. This is very dangerous. This is toxic. They use language. The communists learned how to use language as a psychological mechanism to program the human mind and to implement mind control on the people. So by reinventing the vocabulary and using a system called political correctness, political correctness is a psychological revolutionary mechanism designed to conquer and overthrow and enslave any nation. But the Frankfurt School was so sophisticated that their center of their revolution was based on the use of language changing, like politically correct words like diversity, tolerance, and all the other buzzwords they use. Those are all mind control words that paved the way for a Marxist revolution. So is critical race theory. So are terms like systemic racism. So are terms like, let's have a national, it's time for America to have a conversation about this. Let's have a conversation about this. The term conversation is a safe word, but it's a mind control word because people will drop their guard to have a conversation. They need to understand that the purpose of the conversation is to take over their mind and their ideology and their belief system like an ideological virus. We're at the tipping point. We're at the tipping point. People have been warning about this for decades. The Bible warns about it in Bible prophecy. Everything that we're seeing happening is a flagrant, open violation of God and God's Word. But Christians say nothing. Of every group in America is every ethnic group, racial group, sexual identity group, every group in America is standing up aggressively for their rights. Every group in America has come out of the closet and is no longer hiding. and is openly demanding their rights. Every group in America is demanding their rights. Every group in America is stepping onto the stage and functioning as an actor in history. And every group in America has leadership and organizational structure to stand up for their rights and further their belief system, their agenda, and their lifestyle. The only group in America that's still in the closet, the only group in America that is still in the closet is evangelical Christians. They're the only group that is not standing up for their rights, does not have an agenda to further the gospel of Jesus Christ, and evangelical Christians are the only group in America that are still hiding in the closet. They're the only group in America that refuse to come out of the closet and stand up for their rights. That's madness. How can you possibly explain to me that decision to be passive, the decision to be non-active, the decision to retreat and hide in the closet, in light of the fact that there are now revolutionary groups in America who are openly saying, we are going to destroy America as you know it. We're going to destroy your freedoms. And most of all, we are going to wipe Christianity and the Bible off the face of the earth, right in front of your face, and you're not going to do anything about it. They're brazen. They're bold. They're in your face. Why are they so brazen? Why are they so bold? Because they know they're attacking a soft target of feminized men, of many generations of Christians who don't have a biblical theology. They have a theology based on being bewildered. They don't have the mind of Christ. They have a bewildered mind. Why do they have a bewildered mind? Because they have not been taught the truth of the Bible. They have not been taught the total truth of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. They have not been properly instructed with a biblical worldview. Instead, they have been given the spiritual equivalent of a 24/7 diet of Cocoa Puffs, leprechauns, Lucky Charms, and all the other sugary garbage with GMO food, with no nutrition. The evangelical church and many Christians, their souls are rotting because instead of getting the gospel of Jesus Christ, instead of being taught the Word of God, instead of being taught a biblical worldview based on the Bible, they have been spoon-fed Lucky Charms, Cocoa Puffs, and other super sugar cereal diet. That's their spiritual diet, junk food. And what comes out of that is weakness, passivity, confusion, fear. That is not the mindset that God has instructed in His Word, if you read it, that we're supposed to have. The mindset that you and I and every young Christian person who's a Christian, every adult who's a Christian, the mindset that every pastor, seminary professor, and regular Christian should have should, number one, be a mindset with absolutely no fear. Because fear is the primary weapon used by communists, Marxists, and Satan. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. We must renew our minds with the Word of God so that the spirit of fear can no longer attach itself like a parasite to our body, soul, and spirit and suck the life out of us and attempt to suck the life out of the supernatural church of Jesus Christ. The spirit of fear, the only way, you see, this this Christian passivity is connected to the feminization of Christian males. Do you hear what I'm saying? Feminized Christian males are dominated by fear because they're afraid to fight back in a law-abiding spiritual manner. They're afraid of being looked at with disapproval from the culture. Their primary goal is to be liked, wanted, and accepted by a world that is running away from Jesus and the Bible. Those are feminized Christian males. They don't have the DNA of fearlessness, of standing up for what's right, for protecting themselves and their loved ones, and for doing what's right. Instead, they have succumbed to a spirit of fear. And God said, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, of power, love, and a sound mind. That power, that Christian males should be being taught the Bible and having a relationship with Jesus Christ modeled before them by strong men of God who are intelligent, filled with the Word, filled with the love of God, and who are fearless. But if the men discipling them are feminized Christian males with a feminized, non-biblical Christian theology, the main character, you're not going to see the fruit of the Spirit. You're going to see men dominated by fear. Men dominated. Here's the main way you can tell when a man is dominated by fear. When there's a battle, when the enemy comes in and threatens to destroy the men, their wives, their children, the society, and innocent people and the elderly, when this threat invades them, and this threat is designed to destroy them, instead of standing up and being men, they run and hide. They run and hide because they are not filled with power. Power is the opposite of fear. They're not filled with power. They're controlled externally by a spirit of fear. The only way that there can be a turnaround, the only way there can truly be a great awakening, the only way we can save America from entering the most brutal, violent, and evil totalitarian dictatorship in the history of the world, the only way we can stop that from happening to America, the only way we can continue to keep a free America where we can preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and make disciples of all nations, the only way that that can happen is that there must first be a spiritual victory in the minds and the hearts of all the men who were programmed to be feminized males, feminized Christian males. Their mind has to change. Their thinking has to change. Their perception has to change. They have to reject being and thinking and create and participating in the creation of their own identity. But in the creation of their own identity, they're actually in rebellion from Jesus Christ, and they're overtly rejecting the Word of God. Because God has much to say to Christian men and men of God and women of God throughout history through His Word. And this is what God has to say. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. It's time for a game changer. We either have a game changer or we go to the camps, folks. That's not paranoia. Read your history book. Read the history of warfare and conquest going back to the beginning of time. There's not two winners in a war. One wins, one loses. In this spiritual war, it has been the Christians who have been viciously attacked. but they have been encouraged, they have been seduced to stay asleep and to be feminized, to lay low, to be passive, to pretend they don't see what's happening to their families, their children, their sons and their daughters, their nation and their government, as cowards would do. As cowards would do. God did not create men and women, especially men, to be cowards. You don't hear sermons on this, ever. The only person, I'm not saying this for the purpose of bragging, it's a reality check. The only person I have ever heard preach many, many sermons and messages warning about the sin of cowardice is me. And it's not because I'm great. I've never heard any pastor touch that subject. But that subject is very close to the heart of God. You see, when you don't study and teach the book of Revelation, you deprive yourself and the men who you, through your unfaithfulness as a shepherd, have allowed to be feminized theologically and psychologically. By feminized, I mean passive. By feminized, I mean not doing what the Bible actually says, but playing church stuff. So you say, Paul, what are you making this stuff up? No, I'm not making this stuff up. I teach Bible prophecy. I'm a professor of eschatology or Bible prophecy. And the reason I began teaching against the sin of cowardice, which I still have never heard anyone preach on, is because when I was studying Bible prophecy, which 87% of evangelical churches refuse to teach Bible prophecy, when I was studying the book of Revelation, which like 89% of evangelical churches forbid the teaching of the book of Revelation. So they're depriving their people and their men of the power of God and the knowledge of God and how to deal with what's happening. So what I discovered as I've read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation countless times. I've read the book of Revelation in and of itself so many times I can't remember. It has to be in the thousands. And other prophetic passages from the Word of God. And as I was studying the book of Revelation, because I would continually hear Christians outline from their human perspective, because that's what their pastor taught them, a human perspective. I would hear Christians outline the sins that would keep people from going into heaven. But I would notice that when I would hear Christians repeat sins that would keep people out of heaven, I noticed that on a regular occurrence that they would leave out certain sins habitually. They would amplify other sins habitually. And they would totally ignore the order of the sins, which I believe reflect the order of priority in God's eyes. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Help me change this nation.